It was a chilly evening when I first noticed him, a lone dog with a coat the color of autumn leaves, sitting quietly by the back door of Bella's bistro. I had seen stray dogs before, of course, but there was something different about this one. His demeanor was calm, almost regal, as if he knew he didn't belong with the others scavenging in the alley. Instead, he waited, his intelligent eyes scanning the doorway as if hoping for an invitation. When Sophia, one of our staff, brought out the scraps from dinner service, he didn't pounce on the food like most strays would. No, he waited for her to set the bowl down, then approached cautiously, his steps deliberate, and ate with a surprising gentleness. After finishing, he did something that astonished us all. He picked up the empty bowl in his mouth, walked back to the door, and set it down as though he was returning it. Sophia and I exchanged a glance, both stunned and amused. We began calling him Santiago. He came back every evening, and we soon fell into a routine. One of us would leave food at the door, and Santiago would appear as if on cue, his eyes warm with gratitude. It wasn't long before he became a part of our little world. I couldn't help but wonder about him. Who was this dog that carried himself with such quiet dignity? Where had he come from? And what was his story? But I never expected the answer to come in such a remarkable way. One evening, as the last customers lingered over their desserts, I stepped outside to bring Santiago his dinner. But instead of eating, he barked softly, then looked at me and took a step away from the door. It was as if he wanted me to follow. "Santiago, what is it?" I asked, half joking. But there was an urgency in his eyes that made me take him seriously. I called Sophia to join me, and together we followed Santiago through the dimly lit streets. He led us to an old, weathered house on the edge of the neighborhood. In the overgrown garden, Santiago stopped and barked again, then turned to look at the door. The sound brought an elderly woman out onto the porch, her face lined with the wear of too many hard years. She held a small puppy in her arms, and another peeked out from behind her legs. "Who's there?" she called, her voice wary but not unfriendly. I stepped forward. "My name is Lucas. And this is Sophia. We followed Santiago here. Is everything all right?" The woman's expression softened at the mention of the dog's name. "So that's what you've been calling him," she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I've been calling him Guardian. He's been bringing food here for weeks, feeding these little ones." She gestured to the puppies, who were now cautiously edging closer to Santiago. She introduced herself as Isabel and invited us inside. The house was small and sparsely furnished, but it was warm, and there was a sense of care in the way she had arranged her modest belongings. Isabel explained that she had found the puppies abandoned in a nearby park and couldn't bear to leave them. Santiago had appeared not long after, seemingly out of nowhere, and had begun bringing them scraps. As we listened to Isabel's story, I felt an overwhelming sense of admiration for her. Despite her struggles, she had lost her husband a few years ago and was living on a tight pension. She had opened her heart to these vulnerable creatures. "What about you, Isabel?" Sophia asked gently. "Are you taking care of yourself?" Isabel hesitated, then admitted that she often skipped meals to make sure the puppies and Santiago were fed. Her eyes filled with tears as she spoke. "But they've brought me so much joy. Santiago, especially. He's more than just a dog. His family." That night, as we walked back to the restaurant, I couldn't stop thinking about Isabel and her quiet courage. It was clear to me that Santiago hadn't chosen Bella's bistro by chance. He had a purpose, and it was to help this remarkable woman and her two little charges. The next morning, I gathered the staff and told them about Isabel. The response was immediate and unanimous. We had to help. Sophia and I returned to her house with bags of food, blankets, and supplies for the puppies. Isabel was overwhelmed with gratitude. But it was Santiago who watched us with the most knowing eyes, as if he had orchestrated the whole thing. From that day on, Isabel and her furry companions became a part of our lives. We made sure she never had to worry about food again. And Santiago, who still insisted on returning his bowl each evening, seemed to grow even prouder of his role. Looking back, I realized that Santiago was more than a dog. He was a teacher. Through his actions, he reminded us of the power of kindness, the strength of quiet determination, and the extraordinary connections that can form when we open our hearts. I didn't know it then, but that was just the beginning of a journey that would transform not only Isabel's life but all of ours. Santiago had brought us together, and together we would discover just how far a single act of compassion could ripple. When Sophia and I returned to Bella's Bistro after meeting Isabel and the puppies, the staff was already waiting eagerly for news. I recounted the story of Santiago, our regal stray, and how he had been delivering food to sustain Isabel and the puppies. There was a silence as the weight of her struggles settled over us, followed by an outpouring of determination. "She can't do this alone," said Sophia, her voice resolute. "We're helping her." No arguments. It wasn't just Sophia who felt this way. Everyone in the restaurant seemed to agree. That night, as we closed the bistro, ideas flew across the room. Marco, the head chef and a natural leader, volunteered to organize meals for Isabel. Sophia suggested reaching out to a local veterinarian she knew. And even the newer staff, who hadn't yet met Isabel, were pitching in with enthusiasm. By the next day, we had a plan. I returned to Isabel's house with Sophia, armed with enough supplies to ease her immediate worries. When Isabel saw us at her door, she looked stunned. "What is all this?" she asked, eyes wide. "It's a little help," I said gently, though the bags we carried were far from little. "You've been doing so much already. Let us share the load." Isabel hesitated, her pride and gratitude warring in her expression. But then she looked at the puppies, Luna and Sol, and Santiago, who was now stretched out on her porch like he belonged there. "All right," she said, her voice trembling. "Thank you." The next few weeks were transformative for all of us. We made sure Isabel had fresh groceries, cleaned her home, and ensured the puppies were healthy and growing strong. True to her promise, Sophia brought in her veterinarian friend, Dr. Rivera, who examined Santiago, Luna, and Sol. The vet declared them in good health but noted that Isabel's house needed repairs. The house was another story entirely. While it held warmth, it bore the marks of years of neglect and weathering. Leaky windows let in the cold, and the roof groaned ominously under the weight of years. Still, Isabel remained resilient. "You're already doing so much," she said when Marco brought up the condition of her home. "I can manage." But we didn't stop there. With Marco's leadership, we set up a small fund for repairs. The restaurant staff pooled tips, and even some of our regular customers contributed. It wasn't enough for a complete renovation, but it made a difference. A new roof was installed just in time for winter, and the windows were sealed against the biting cold. Meanwhile, Isabel became an integral part of Bella's Bistro. Marco offered her a job helping with prep work in the kitchen, and though she initially resisted, saying she wasn't sure she could keep up, her passion for food soon became clear. One day, as she diced vegetables with the precision of a seasoned chef, Marco grinned and said, "You're better at this than I am." Isabel laughed, the sound light and joyous. It was the first time I had seen her truly at ease. Her worries momentarily lifted. And Santiago? He took his role as protector of this growing family seriously. Each morning, he accompanied Isabel to the bistro, walking proudly by her side. Luna and Sol, playful and mischievous, charmed everyone they met. Customers began lingering after their meals, hoping for a chance to meet the pups. Our little community began to rally around Isabel, Santiago, and the puppies in ways I never expected. Donations of food and supplies arrived unsolicited, and offers of help came from people who had heard their story. It was as if Santiago's quiet heroism had inspired something deep within all of us. Through it all, I marveled at the transformation. What had started as a simple act of feeding a stray dog had grown into something much larger. We weren't just helping Isabel survive, we were helping her rebuild her life. And in doing so, we discovered a sense of purpose and connection that made all of us feel more alive. But the most remarkable thing was the way Isabel began to change. Her steps grew lighter, her laughter more frequent. She often talked about her late husband, not with sorrow, but with gratitude for the love they had shared. "I never imagined I'd find another family," she said one evening, as we sat together after a long day. "But here you all are." And we were. Because of Santiago. Because of Isabel. And because of the love we had chosen to share. And we weren't done yet. This was just the beginning of a story none of us could have predicted. As the weeks turned into months, Isabel's presence in Bella's Bistro became indispensable. Her kindness and quiet determination earned her a place in our hearts. And her cooking, rooted in recipes passed down through generations, started to leave its mark on the restaurant's menu. She shared these recipes reluctantly at first, pulling out an old, weathered notebook from her kitchen. The pages were filled with her grandmother's handwriting, the ink smudged with time but still legible. As she walked us through each recipe, her voice carried a reverence, a connection to her family's past. Marco immediately saw potential in these dishes. "These aren't just recipes," he said one evening after tasting Isabel's stew. "A rich, hearty dish with flavors that seemed to tell a story. Their history. Their love on a plate." And so, Bella's Bistro began offering abuela's specials on Sunday evenings. Customers flocked to try them, enchanted not only by the flavors but also by the story behind each dish. Santiago, ever the dignified guardian, found a new role during these busy Sundays. He stationed himself near the entrance, greeting diners with a calm, steady presence that seemed to set the tone for the evening. Meanwhile, Luna and Sol, now boisterous and curious, became unofficial ambassadors, charming children and adults alike with their playful antics. Despite the warmth and joy within the bistro, Isabel's house remained a lingering concern. Even with the repairs we had managed, it was clear the structure was fighting a losing battle against time. Winter brought bitter cold, and one particularly harsh storm knocked out her heating system completely. That night, Isabel and the dogs stayed with us at the bistro, curled up near the kitchen's ovens for warmth. It was a temporary fix. But as I watched her trying to keep Luna and Sol comfortable, something in me shifted. This wasn't sustainable. The next morning, Marco called an impromptu staff meeting. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady, "about the apartment above the bistro. It's been empty since my mother moved to the coast. It's small, but it's warm, safe, and I think it would be perfect for Isabel and the dogs." The room erupted with agreement. The idea felt right, as if the space had been waiting for this very purpose. When we presented the idea to Isabel, her reaction was equal parts shock and hesitation. "You've already done so much," she protested, her hands fluttering in the air. "I couldn't possibly." But Sophia gently interrupted. "Isabel, sometimes family isn't just the people you're born to. It's the people who open their arms when you need it most. That's what we are now. Family." Tears filled Isabel's eyes as she looked around the room. In a few short months, these people had become her lifeline, her champions, her family. The move was orchestrated with precision. While some staff helped Isabel pack, others transformed the apartment into a cozy haven. Santiago, ever watchful, supervised the entire process, carrying small items in his mouth and keeping a close eye on the puppies. The day Isabel officially moved in, Bella's Bistro closed early for a celebration. Regular customers, now part of this extended family, joined us to welcome Isabel to her new home. That night, as we sat together in her warm, safe apartment, Isabel's smile said everything. She was home not just in a physical space, but in the hearts of the community that had embraced her. Isabel's new home above Bella's Bistro brought a sense of security that she hadn't felt in years. The warmth of the apartment, the gentle hum of laughter and conversation from the restaurant below, and the steady companionship of Santiago, Luna, and Sol gave her a renewed sense of purpose. One crisp morning, as she sipped chamomile tea by the window, she noticed a young woman huddled near the alley behind the bistro. Her coat was thin, her face drawn, and her hands trembled as she clutched a bag too small to contain all her worries. Isabel's heart tightened. The woman reminded her too much of herself not so long ago. "Marco," Isabel said later that day, her voice soft but resolute. "I want to do something for people like her. People who are struggling." Marco, ever supportive, smiled. "Tell me what you need." From that conversation, Hope's Kitchen was born. Every Tuesday evening, the bistro would close its doors to regular business and open them to anyone in need. A hot meal was offered without question or judgment, along with a warm seat, kind words, and the company of people who understood. The first evening was quiet, just a few hesitant souls who had heard of the initiative through whispers around town. Isabel greeted each person as if they were a treasured guest. She served her grandmother's soup, hearty and comforting, and sat with them, listening to their stories. Santiago moved quietly among the tables, settling near those who seemed most troubled, offering the silent comfort that only he could provide. As word spread, the Tuesday evenings became more than a meal. They became a gathering of hope and connection. Regular customers, inspired by Isabel's compassion, started to volunteer. They brought extra coats, donated groceries, and even shared job leads. One evening, a woman named Carmen arrived. She was hesitant, her pride holding her back even as hunger pushed her forward. Isabel recognized the look in her eyes and guided her gently to a table. "Sometimes," Isabel said as she placed a steaming bowl of stew in front of her, "accepting help is its own kind of strength." Carmen's story unraveled slowly over the meal. She was an accountant, recently laid off, with no family to turn to. Over time, Carmen became a regular presence, helping organize donations and eventually finding work as Bella's Bistro's bookkeeper. Hope's Kitchen began to grow, its impact rippling outward. Local businesses joined in, offering resources and support. The community fund, named after Santiago, started by Marco and regular patrons, provided financial aid to help elderly residents care for their pets. Through it all, Isabel remained the heart of the initiative, her kindness and resilience drawing people in. The dogs became unofficial ambassadors of hope, Luna and Sol playfully engaging children, while Santiago's quiet wisdom reassured those in need. As the weeks turned to months, Hope's Kitchen became more than an event. It became a movement, a testament to the power of compassion and the truth that even small acts of kindness can transform lives. 2 years had passed since Hope's Kitchen first opened its doors. Isabel often reflected on the path that had led her here. She had started with little, just a bistro, a stray dog, and a heart full of compassion. But those early days, full of uncertainty and hardship, had grown into something beautiful and transformative. Now, Bella's Bistro was not only a place where people came to eat, but a beacon of warmth for the community. The bistro's walls, once bare, were now adorned with pictures, photos of the dogs, of the people they had helped, of the milestones they had all shared. Each frame told a story of resilience, of growth, and of a family built not through blood, but through shared acts of love. Isabel had grown, too. The shy, hesitant woman who had once feared the future now stood at the helm of a thriving, compassionate community. She no longer carried the burden of isolation, for she was surrounded by a family that had chosen her just as she had chosen them. Every week, Hope's Kitchen had grown in size and importance. More people came, some to eat, others simply to be with people who understood. What had started as a small act of kindness now touched dozens of lives each week. And the impact didn't stop there. Luna and Sol, now full-grown and more dignified in their manners, had become beloved symbols of hope. They'd earned their place in the town's heart, not just as pets, but as ambassadors of love and companionship. They visited the local senior center every Wednesday with Isabel and Santiago, providing comfort to residents who had grown lonely in their old age. Their presence was a balm to weary souls, and the sight of the dogs gently resting their heads on elderly laps had become a cherished tradition. Santiago, too, continued his quiet work. He had become a therapy dog, certified and trained to visit schools, hospitals, and homes for those in need of emotional support. It was clear to everyone who knew him that he was more than just a dog. He was a living example of empathy, of understanding, and of the power of nonverbal communication. The bond he shared with Isabel, and with those he encountered, was profound. Then, one evening, Rosa came into the bistro. She was a widow, struggling to make ends meet. Her hands shook as she held tightly to a well-worn leash, at the end of which was an elderly beagle mix, frail and slow-moving. The moment Isabel saw Rosa, she recognized the look in her eyes, the same look she had once had. Rosa sat at a corner table, her dog nestled at her feet. Isabel approached her quietly, offering a cup of warm tea and a reassuring smile. She asked Rosa to share her story, and as she listened, she couldn't help but feel her heart aching for the woman who had been left to face so much alone. Rosa's worries were many, but her greatest fear was having to give up her dog. She couldn't afford the veterinary bills, and her small pension barely covered her own needs, let alone the needs of her beloved pet. Isabel knew she couldn't let this happen. Within days, a plan was in motion. Rosa was offered a part-time job at the bistro, helping with the herb and vegetable garden Isabel had started as part of Hope's Kitchen. Her dog was enrolled in the Senior Pet Wellness Program, funded by the community's donations and the ongoing efforts of the Cabiro Fund. The community had come together once again to provide for one of their own, and Isabel felt a deep sense of satisfaction. "What looks like the end of your story," Isabel said softly to Rosa one afternoon as their dogs played in the garden, "is sometimes just the beginning of a new chapter. You just need someone to help you turn the page." As the seasons changed, Bella's Bistro remained a hub of love and support. And while Isabel could never have imagined the far-reaching consequences of that one small act of kindness, feeding a hungry dog, she had come to understand something truly profound. The smallest gestures of love could ripple outwards, creating waves of change, of connection, and of hope. And so, the story of Bella's Bistro, Santiago, Luna, Sol, and all the people who had come together to make it a place of belonging continued to unfold. They had built a community not just around food, but around love. And in that love, they found everything they had ever needed. As the days passed and the seasons continued to change, each member of the extended family that had gathered around Bella's Bistro reflected on the lessons they had learned along the way. Each one had been touched by the events that unfolded, and they carried their own profound understanding of life, love, and the connections that bind us all together. Isabel often found herself reflecting on how far she had come. She had started with so little, just a bistro, a stray dog, and a heart full of hope, but now, she saw that the power of one simple act of kindness had woven a tapestry of connections, turning her business into a lifeline for many. Through it all, Isabel learned that love and kindness are the most powerful currencies in life. When we give what little we have, the universe has a way of returning it, sometimes in ways we cannot predict. She had learned that family is not defined by blood, but by the bonds we choose to nurture, by the way we show up for each other. Santiago, once just a stray dog with a rough beginning, had transformed into a symbol of hope and healing for many. His presence at the senior center, with his calm, empathetic demeanor, had provided comfort to people who had long since felt forgotten. Santiago learned that true healing happens not just through words, but through the simple act of being present, offering quiet companionship, and showing empathy in the most subtle ways. He understood that sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply listen, without judgment, without expectation. The unconditional love he had experienced in his own life was the greatest gift he could offer to others. Luna and Sol, having grown from playful puppies to graceful, dignified dogs, had become the unofficial mascots of Bella's Bistro. They charmed customers with their wagging tails and playful antics. But they also offered something much deeper. Their silent presence comforted those who came through the bistro's doors. And their work with the reading program in local schools taught them that even the smallest acts of kindness can make a lasting impact. They learned that true strength lies in gentleness. And sometimes the simplest actions, like offering a soft nuzzle or a wagging tail, can bring the most healing. They had discovered the power of showing up, day after day, with love and without expectation. Rosa had entered Bella's Bistro in a state of despair, afraid she would have to part with her beloved dog because she simply couldn't afford to care for him. But thanks to the generosity of the community and Isabel's unwavering support, Rosa learned that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, but of strength. She had learned that we are all connected, and it's through reaching out to one another that we find the support we need to survive and thrive. Rosa had discovered that there is always hope, even in our darkest moments. And sometimes, what we need most is someone to remind us of that hope. The community that had rallied behind Bella's Bistro, those who volunteered, donated, and participated in Hope's Kitchen, had learned that the true measure of a community is how it cares for its most vulnerable members. They had discovered that love multiplies when shared, and that the collective good of a community far surpasses any individual achievement. They understood that when we lift each other up, we all rise together. Their efforts in Hope's Kitchen, from providing meals to offering jobs and support, showed them that compassion doesn't have to be grandiose to be powerful. It's the small, consistent acts of kindness that have the greatest, most lasting impact. And for the dogs, Santiago, Luna, and Sol, they had learned one final, profound truth: love, when given freely, creates a ripple effect that touches every life it encounters. They had been at the center of this journey, each one offering their unwavering support to the people they loved. And in return, they had received more than they ever expected: new families, a place in their community, and the fulfillment of their deepest needs. They had learned that no act of love is ever wasted, and that even when we are not looking for it, the world has a way of providing what we need the most. As Isabel sat quietly in the bistro one evening, watching the sun set behind the hills, she realized that the story of Bella's Bistro and the people and animals who had come together was far from over. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with more love, more healing, and more connections than she had ever dreamed possible. In the end, the greatest lesson of all was that life's most profound miracles come not from what we have, but from what we are willing to give to others. And with that thought, she smiled, knowing that the circle of love, community, and kindness would continue to grow, as long as they all remained open to each other's stories.